Good afternoon. This is Paul Glumaz. Today is the 29th of August, 2020. And we have just been through two political conventions. This is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. And we have before us some very interesting developments, a tale of two conventions. The Democratic Party convention of the week before and the Republican Party convention that just ended. Okay, so if you look at these conventions in their total, and I did not watch much of the Democratic Party convention. I watched, and not really much of the Republican convention, but there were many things that were, snippets of this and that. But what comes out of this convention is very interesting. The first thing that you notice is that the Democratic Party convention was including in itself the neocons, the Cindy McCain, and the whole neocon agenda was coming in. And their convention was focused on how bad Trump is, primarily. Everything was blamed on Trump. And the whole convention was dominated by the backdrop of the riots and Black Lives Matter and so-called social justice, and that these were the main issues. Race was the main issue, beyond Trump being very bad and the cause of all the problems, and that he's responsible for the deaths from the COVID-19, he's responsible for all the riots, he's responsible for everything bad. And this narrative played out, including some cancel culture stuff and other aspects, had the total sympathy of the mainstream media. And that Trump had no empathy, that what's going on in the streets is a reaction to the racism of Donald Trump and the police departments and so on and so forth. So that was the tenor of the convention. And somehow, if you elected Joe Biden, who came in at the end with a pre-prepared speech, you're going to have peace and tranquility and all that stuff, healing and empathy and all that stuff is very. It's based on a kind of profile of a layer of the population that generally votes. Now, the Republican convention was a dramatic change from previous Republican conventions. The Republican convention saw no big money people. They saw mostly working people telling their stories, African Americans telling their stories, and the emphasis or the conception that was presented by Trump was that the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln. Now that's shocking. Oh yeah, the Republican Party at one time was the party of Lincoln, but it ceased representing anything approximate to anything Lincoln-esque by the early part of the 1900s, early part of the 20th century. The Republican Party had ceased to be a Republican Party. It was a plutocratic party for the most part from then on. Bringing it back to Lincoln is a dramatic change, and opening up the party to the former base of the Democratic Party, which is what is coming in, the working class, African Americans. Okay, a large African American shift is going on into the Republican Party, not to vote for the Republican Party as such, but to participate in the Republican Party as candidates, as active organizers. So this is different. This is not, vote for me. This is a much more different kind of thing. So these two conventions could not be more opposite to each other. Many of the Bush crowd are going over to Biden. Okay. So the emphasis was on working people and a morality of hard work, progress, and development. Trump even said that he planned to make America a super manufacturer once again and unleash the productive powers of manufacturing. Well, that's not going to happen unless you adopt Lyndon LaRouche's policies. And added to that a space program. The Democratic Party was all about the guilt of the American people for their current and historical crimes. The Republican Party was all about the greatness of the American people and their exceptionalism. You couldn't have a more profound contrast. It could even be seen in the music at the end, where the Republican Party played an Italian aria and a classical piece Ave Maria, rather than a rock, drug, sex, countercultural music. Now, the Democrats were totally focused on the Postal Service and telegraphing that they're going to contest the election, and that they want that the military has an obligation to come in and remove Trump if he refuses to leave in a contested election. And finally, when Chief of Staff Chairman General Milley was posed us, he said, the U.S. military has no basis in the Constitution to resolve a presidential election. That is up to Congress and the courts. Interesting. So now the most stunning part is where Trump linked the free trade globalization, which involved China and the U.S. Job loss, with those extremely wealthy who profited from this and who send their kids to private schools, live in guarded communities all over the world, and have gotten made, shall I say, profits at the expense of the nation, at the expense of the people. This is an attack on the 1%. It's also an attack on the whole idea of the magic of the marketplace and free trade, where your nation doesn't matter. It's the market. It's making a profit. It's your own greed that only matters. And that's a very significant change that's now going on around it's not a change that's going on in Trump, but it's this change in the message coming into the Republican Party. This is very significant. So I'm going to situate this a little bit into the question of the future. Okay. I take you back to the period when Nixon took the dollar off the gold reserve system, and then by 1973 we were in a new financial system based on currency speculation. London became the primary center of world finance, so Wall Street became the secondary center. And in that system, there is no concept of the nation. There is no concept of the nation. There is only profit from free market activity, lowering wages, exploitation, what have you, where you're essentially a slave of a financial system. And then you have permanent wars to enforce it, to enforce the system. You don't want countries to take matters into their own hands and do whatever. Now, the people who designed the floating exchange system ultimately knew that the thing was going to collapse. And that element of the oligarchy who organized all of this at the highest level, who promoted the people that organized this, have been preparing for their vision of the future. And their vision of the future is a reduction of world population to about 1 billion to 2 billion people at the most, and a transformation of society from an industrial society to a post-industrial society to a green post-industrial society, where you have a minimum of industry and you have people living in much more primitive conditions, in poverty and close, close to nature, and that's their vision. And they've been working on that vision for since the post-war period, but especially since the dollar was taken off the gold reserve system. And then when the system collapses, finally, they want to put that in place. They want to crush the nation state by sucking them into this globalized system, crush the nation state, replace it with these global multilateral institutions, and then when that thing collapses, collapse it into bankers' dictatorship and a total control with an emphasis on green financing. So you don't get any development, you don't get any industrialization, you don't get any scientific progress. So that's a vision of the future that's being implemented. And in the past, you would have elements of the Democratic Party and elements of the Republican Party, but mostly the Democratic Party, would be sharing that vision. But now the entire Democratic Party is sharing that vision. The entire establishment is sharing that vision. This Green New Deal stuff, which is way out there, all based on the climate emergency and, and decarbonization and all of that. Now, there's a different vision of the future that LaRouche represents, which is, again, been being in preparation for 50 years. Is to replace this system when it collapses, at what point, with a new sovereign-based global financial system where nations can create their credit and they can work with each other to go in the opposite direction, to go towards fusion, to go towards space, to go towards the most advanced technologies, to go for the most rapid industrialization of the world. And China partly goes along with that. But that vision of the future is now also coming into being, because what Trump has done is totally reject the earlier vision of a Malthusian population reduction world. And he personally has demonstrated that he has a vision of a future in space, the Artemis program, and a future from the creating on the moon the industrial capability to start to colonize Mars. That's a different vision. That's a whole different vision. That means an entirely different planet, an entirely different population characteristics, that massive upgrading of people's living standards and education and so forth. So he's indicating he has that vision. He hasn't proposed how that's going to be carried out in terms of the financing and so forth and so on, because you're in the financial system. But ultimately he's going to have to turn the Federal Reserve into a national bank, and it's partly implicitly going that way at this time because of the crisis. And then you have the other vision saying that COVID crisis is and the lockdown is what provides the springboard for bringing in the Green New Deal. This is what Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, is saying. So here's a guy trying to save lives, right? But he's promoting a policy after the COVID period that will kill most of the world's population. It's kind of a contradiction. But anyhow, that's the United Nations. So this genuflection to the green agenda is really occurring because people are faced with the power of this empire, this British Empire, this financial empire that, and all its tentacles. So that's what's going on there. So both these two different visions are reflected in these parties, which is quite amazing, because in the past you don't see this kind of difference. Usually they're fighting over who's going to put more money in your pocket, or they're fighting over who can do it better, who can stand up to so-and-so better, that kind of crap. But this is different. So we're entering a period where it's very different. So we're in this period with these two different visions. And the Republican Party convention was actually Trump's convention, which was part of him taking over the Republican Party, basically. Okay, the convention was a consolidation of a shift in the Republican Party, the bringing in of an entire new layer of people into the Republican Party. So that's what you're actually dealing with. So you have this global system that was set up in the post-71 period. And that system has trapped everybody. And it was a system based on greed. And the abandonment of the interests of the nation and the promotion of deregulation. China managed to do relatively well in that system. They managed to develop because they also had internally a different system, but they're still stuck in the system. So what Trump has done is put America first ahead of greed. This is very important. You can be greedy, but you have to put America first. If you have to get greedy, but you can only satisfy your greed if you put America first. Okay, so now, at the cornerstone now we're also facing a increased military confrontation with China and Russia going on. And this is coming from the Defense Department and the State Department. These are not agencies that Trump controls. What controls the Defense Department and the State Department is the special relationship with the British. It's that special relationships that allows the British to integrate the entire military intelligence coordination with them in terms of their control over how. So what they're doing is mobilizing the U.S. against China and Russia. At the same time, behind our backs, they're going to China to try to work a deal with them at our expense. So that's how the British always operate. They soft cop to China and they use the hard cop of the United States, or vice versa. They always do it this way. This is the British. So meanwhile, Trump is tearing up the entire world system, going with decoupling, which is going to be very dangerous when you decouple. But and so this is very complicated situation. And then you have the financial system, and then you have the attempt to reset things, to have the economic collapse occur, and then reset things into this global Green New Deal. And that's really what's going to be harder to do if Trump gets a second term. It's going to be harder to reset the world and the human species back into the Middle Ages if Trump achieves a second term, because that changes all the relationships of all the nations with each other and with the United States if Trump gets a second term. And John Bolton made this clear, that Trump is not ideologically committed to any of these things like globalization and confrontation and all of that he will go for whatever it takes to increase the economic potential of the United States. And this is where we are. And I'll have more in a week from now. And thank you for watching.